During the delivery of the wedding invitations, my daughter told me, "I prefer to invite only Dad. You understand, right?" I smiled and told her whose card was paying for the ceremony. The look on Emma's face was worth every penny I'd secretly spent. Her perfectly made-up features froze, mouth slightly open, as 30 years of carefully constructed family mythology crumbled in an instant. "What do you mean, Mom?" she stammered, clutching the cream-colored wedding invitation she hadn't planned to give me. I kept my voice steady though my heart was racing. "Your father and I have an arrangement, Emma. We've had it since the divorce. Who do you think has been financing all those grand gestures of his over the years?" We were sitting in my modest kitchen, the morning light streaming through curtains I'd sewn myself. Emma had stopped by just for a minute, clearly to soften the blow of my exclusion from her wedding. I'd made her favorite tea, even as I suspected the reason for her visit. "That's not possible," she whispered, shaking her head. "Dad handles all the country club membership for your graduation party, your semester abroad in Paris, that down payment on your first apartment." I took a sip of my cooling tea. "That was all me, sweetheart. Your father just took the credit." I watched as confusion, then anger, then something like shame flickered across her face. At 29, Emma looked so much like me at her age, before life and Robert had worn me down. "Why would you do that?" she finally asked. "Why would you let him pretend?" The real question hung between us. Why would you let us believe you didn't care? I'd asked myself the same thing countless times over the past 25 years. Sometimes at 3 a.m., staring at my bedroom ceiling. Sometimes while signing another check that Robert would present as his own generosity. "After the divorce, your father made it clear that if I wanted to contribute financially to your lives, it would be through him. He'd present every gift, every opportunity as coming from him alone." I felt the old familiar ache in my chest. The alternative was constant conflict that would have hurt you and Thomas even more. Emma's gaze dropped to the wedding invitation in her hands, the embossed script, the gold foil edges. The $15,000 price tag that I'd already paid half of, according to my arrangement with Robert. "So the wedding," she began. $60,000, I said quietly. "That was the budget your father and I agreed on. I've already transferred half to his account." She looked up sharply. "And he told me you couldn't be bothered to contribute anything." The hurt in her voice made my maternal instincts surge forward, wanting to protect her from this pain. But I was tired of protecting everyone except myself. "I've been bothering for a very long time, Emma. Whether you saw it or not." She set her teacup down so hard that tea sloshed onto my worn tablecloth. "Why are you telling me this now? To make me feel guilty? To ruin my wedding?" I recognized Robert in her defensive anger. The way she immediately positioned herself as the victim. He'd taught her well. "I'm telling you because you're sitting in my kitchen, explaining why I'm not welcome at my only daughter's wedding, while I'm paying for half of it." My voice finally cracked. "Even I have my limits." Emma stood abruptly, gathering her purse and the wedding invitation I wasn't supposed to receive. "I need to talk to Dad about this." Of course she did. She'd always run to him first. "When you do," I said as she headed for the door, "ask him about the journals I kept during your childhood. The ones he burned during the divorce so there would be no record of who was really there for your homework, your nightmares, your fever dreams, and who was out with his secretaries." She paused, hand on the doorknob, not turning around. "You're just bitter," she said, but her voice held a note of uncertainty I'd never heard before. "I was," I admitted, "for a long time. Now I'm just tired of being invisible in my own family." The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through my empty house. I wasn't sure if I just made the biggest mistake of my life, or finally done something I should have done decades ago. I picked up my phone and called my son Thomas. Unlike Emma, he'd always been more perceptive, less willing to accept the family narrative at face value. His wife had just given birth to my first grandchild. A grandson I'd only seen in texted photos because they lived across the country. "Hey, Mom," he answered, sounding exhausted but happy. "Thomas," I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "I think it's time I told you some things about our family." The first time Robert threatened to turn the children against me, I was still naive enough to believe it was just another empty threat. No one will believe you over me, and, he'd said, his voice calm as he straightened his tie in our bedroom mirror. I'm the fun parent. You're the one always working, always worried about money. We'd been arguing about his latest affair. This time with his young paralegal. Like the others before her, she'd called our home, either oblivious to my existence or deliberately flaunting her relationship with my husband. The children know who's been there for them, I'd responded, though even then a seed of doubt had taken root. Did they really? At 10 and 13, Emma and Thomas had already grown accustomed to Robert's lavish gifts and weekend adventures. All financed by my long hours at the insurance firm where I'd worked my way up from receptionist to regional manager. I should have known better. When the divorce finally came 2 years later, Robert executed his threat with precision. Your mother doesn't want this family anymore, he told them while I was at work. She's chosen her career over us. By the time I returned home that evening, my children regarded me with the wary suspicion of betrayed strangers. The divorce proceedings stretched over 11 bitter months. Robert dragged his feet, concealed assets, and poisoned the children against me, one careful conversation at a time. Meanwhile, I worked even longer hours, trying to ensure we wouldn't lose the house, that college funds would remain intact. She wasn't even there when you had pneumonia, Emma, he'd say, conveniently forgetting that I'd used all my sick days staying home with her, only returning to work when she was fully recovered and Robert had promised to watch her for a single afternoon. He'd left her with a teenaged neighbor while he met his girlfriend. One night, I discovered my journals missing years of entries documenting our daily lives, the children's milestones, Robert's escalating emotional abuse and frequent absences. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny burning them. It's your word against mine now, he said with a shrug. And they already know who to believe. The final divorce settlement came with an unexpected proposition. Robert's legal practice was struggling, his attention to his career having suffered during his pursuit of younger women. He needed money but wanted to maintain his image as the generous provider. Here's how it's going to work, he said during our final meeting without lawyers present. You'll transfer money to me each month, above and beyond the required child support. I'll use it to give the kids what they need and want. As far as they're concerned, it all comes from me. And why would I agree to that? I'd asked, already knowing the answer. Because if you don't, I'll make sure they never speak to you again. His smile never reached his eyes. I'll tell them you're refusing to help support them, that you've abandoned your responsibilities because you've found yourself, or whatever divorcees call it these days. I thought about fighting him, taking him back to court, demanding family therapy, but I was exhausted, financially drained from legal fees, and terrified of losing my children completely. Fine, I'd finally agreed. But I want receipts. Proof the money is actually going to them. He'd laughed. You're not in a position to negotiate, Anne. And so began 25 years of financial manipulation and emotional extortion. Robert taking credit for every opportunity one provided. My children's gratitude directed entirely toward him. My presence in their lives diminishing to obligatory birthday calls and occasional awkward dinners. Each time Emma or Thomas achieved a milestone, Robert would call with a specific dollar amount. Emma's been accepted to Northwestern, he'd announce. She'll need a new laptop, appropriate clothes, dorm furnishings. $15,000 should cover it. I transfer the money, then wait for Emma's excited call about Dad's incredibly generous gifts. When Thomas decided to study abroad in Germany, Robert demanded $20,000. When Emma wanted a destination graduation party, another $18,000. Their first cars, security deposits on apartments, professional wardrobes. All paid for by me, all credited to Robert. You're letting him rob you blind, my sister Diane would say during our weekly calls. The kids are adults now. Tell them the truth. But what would that accomplish? Force them to realign their entire understanding of their childhood? Make them choose sides all over again? The damage had been done years ago. Revealing the truth seemed selfish. Something I'd do for my own vindication at the expense of their happiness. Or at least, that's what I told myself until I held that wedding invitation that wasn't meant for me. After my revelation to Emma, Thomas called the next morning. His voice was tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Emma called me last night, he said without preamble. She was pretty upset. I imagine she was. I was packing my lunch for work. At 61, I still put in 50-hour weeks at the same insurance company. Is it true? He asked quietly. About the money? About Dad taking credit all these years? I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. Yes. The silence stretched between us. I could hear his baby making soft gurgling sounds in the background. I think I always knew something wasn't right, he finally said. The numbers never added up. Dad's practice barely survived the recession, but somehow he always had money for us. I hadn't expected this. This immediate acceptance of the truth. Why didn't you ever say anything? The question burst from me before I could stop it. Thomas sighed. I tried once. When I was in college, Dad got so angry. Said I was being manipulated by you. That you were trying to turn us against him. The irony was almost too much to bear. I should have tried harder, he continued. I'm sorry, Mom. My Thomas. Always the peacemaker. Always trying to smooth things over. Don't apologize, I said firmly. You were a child when this started. The responsibility was never yours. I'm flying home next week, he said suddenly. With Eliza and the baby. I think it's time you met your grandson. I gripped the phone tighter, afraid to hope. What about your sister's wedding? That's exactly why I'm coming. His voice hardened. Emma needs to understand what's been happening. And Dad needs to finally face the consequences of his actions. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The tentative flutter of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe the truth, however painful, could finally set us all free. I wasn't prepared for how quickly things would unravel after my conversation with Emma. By afternoon, my phone was buzzing constantly. First with a series of increasingly angry texts from Robert, then with calls from his sister Patricia, who had always taken his side during the divorce. I silenced my phone and focused on the spreadsheet in front of me. After 39 years at Northeastern Insurance, I'd earned the luxury of closing my office door when I needed to concentrate. Today I needed that barrier more than ever. A knock interrupted my thoughts. My assistant Denise poked her head in, concern evident on her face. And there's a man in the lobby insisting on seeing you. Says he's your ex-husband. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. In 25 years, Robert had never once visited my workplace. Tell security not to let him up, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. If he makes a scene, they have my permission to remove him. Denise nodded and closed the door. I turned back to my computer, but the numbers blurred before my eyes. Less than an hour later, my phone lit up with a call from Emma. I hesitated before answering. You've turned Dad into a complete madman, she said without preamble. What exactly did you tell him? Nothing, I replied. I haven't spoken to your father. But I imagine you did. There was a pause, followed by what sounded like Emma attempting to control her breathing. A technique her therapist had taught her for anxiety when she was in high school. Another expense Robert had taken credit for, though I'd found the therapist and paid every session. He says you're lying about the money, she finally said. That you're trying to manipulate me before the wedding. Of course he did. I'm not surprised. He showed me all the statements from his accounts. The payments for the wedding venue, the caterers, everything. Did he show you where that money came from? I asked quietly. Did he show you the transfers from my account to his? Another pause. He says those were loan repayments. For money you borrowed years ago. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Emma, I've never borrowed a dime from your father. Not ever. So you're saying he's lying? That all the financial records he showed me are fake? Her voice rose. Why would he do that? The question was so breathtakingly naive that for a moment I couldn't respond. After a lifetime of witnessing Robert's manipulations, how could she still be so blind? Because he's been taking credit for my financial support for decades, I finally said. And he doesn't want to lose his standing in your eyes. I don't believe you. But her voice wavered. Check my accounts, I said simply. I'll give you access. Every payment I've made to your father is documented. This was a gamble. Emma might refuse or worse, share the information with Robert, giving him time to create more convincing lies. But I was tired of shadows and secrets. Fine, she said after a long pause. Text me the information. After we hung up, I sat staring at my office wall, covered with framed insurance certifications and sales achievement awards. None of them mentioned my most impressive accomplishment, financially supporting 2 households for decades while receiving not a shred of appreciation from either one. That evening, Thomas called again. Dad's telling everyone you've had some kind of breakdown, he said without preamble. He's called Emma 3 times today with evidence that you're manipulating everyone. And what do you think? I asked, stirring a pot of soup on my stove. Dinner for one as usual. I think, Thomas said slowly, that Dad doth protest too much. The more desperate he sounds, the more I believe you. Relief washed over me. At least one of my children could see through Robert's facade. I also think, he continued, that Dad's called in reinforcements. Aunt Patricia is telling everyone who'll listen that you've always been jealous of Dad's relationship with us kids. I snorted. Patricia had worshipped her older brother since childhood, turning a blind eye to his affairs, his financial irresponsibility, his emotional manipulation. She'd once told me I should be grateful Robert stayed with me as long as he did. That sounds like Patricia, I said. Mom. Thomas hesitated. Dad called me about the wedding. Said you're threatening to pull funding if you're not included. That's not true, I said firmly. I've never used money as leverage. Unlike your father. I know. Thomas's voice softened. But Emma's upset. She doesn't know what to believe. I closed my eyes, suddenly tired beyond measure. What do you think I should do? Just hold on, he said. I'll be there in 3 days. Don't engage with Dad directly. That's what he wants. A direct conflict where he can paint you as the bitter ex-wife. After we hung up, I turned off my phone completely and finished my soup in silence. 25 years of carefully maintained peace, shattered in less than 48 hours. I wasn't sure whether to feel regret or relief. The next morning I was pulling into my office parking space when I spotted a familiar figure leaning against a silver Mercedes. Robert's older sister Patricia, arms crossed, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes. And, she called as I reluctantly got out of my car. We need to talk. I'm late for work, Patricia. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Robert told me what you're doing. This elaborate lie about financing the children all these years. She shook her head. Haven't you done enough damage to this family? I stared at her, this woman who had once been my sister-in-law, who had held my children as babies, who had sat beside me at countless school functions before the divorce changed everything. The only damage I've done, I said evenly, is staying silent for too long. She scoffed. Robert's been a saint. A single father essentially raising those children while you focused on your career. 25 years of suppressed anger rose in my throat. He wasn't a single father, Patricia. He was a part-time parent who took credit for financial support he never provided. You can't rewrite history, and I'm not the one who burned the journals documenting that history, I replied, thinking of my lost diaries. Your brother did that. Patricia's face hardened. Emma's wedding is in 6 weeks. If you care about her at all, you'll stop this vindictive campaign. Let her have her perfect day. Emma's free to have whatever day she wants, I said, walking around her toward the office building. But I'm done financing the family myth that I don't matter. As I reached the entrance, Patricia called after me. You'll regret this, and Robert won't let you destroy everything he's built. I turned back, the morning sun warm on my face. Tell Robert it's not a threat. It's just the truth finally coming to light. As I walked into the building, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. We need to talk. I've looked at your accounts. Emma arrived at my house that evening just after 7, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled. She clutched a manila folder that I recognized as containing the banking information I'd given her access to. Come in, I said, stepping aside. She hesitated at the threshold, as if entering my home might signify taking a side. Finally, she walked past me into the living room, where she perched awkwardly on the edge of my sofa. I printed some of the statements, she said, opening the folder. The transfers to Dad's account. I sat across from her in my reading chair, giving her space. And there are so many, she whispered, flipping through pages. Going back years. Tens of thousands of dollars. I nodded, watching her face as the reality sank in. Yes. Dad says. She started, then stopped herself. Dad tried to tell me these were for something else. But the dates. They line up perfectly with every major expense in my life. College tuition, my first car. The down payment on my condo. She looked up, meeting my eyes. Even my wedding. Yes, I said again, unable to find other words. Why? Emma's voice cracked. Why would you do this? Let him take all the credit while I barely acknowledged you. The pain in her voice made my heart ache. I wanted to go to her, hold her as I had when she was small. But the distance between us felt vast, and I wasn't sure she would welcome my comfort. At first, it was because I believed it was best for you and Thomas, I said carefully. Your father made it clear that if I tried to tell you the truth, he would make sure you never trusted me again. So you just gave up? There was accusation in her tone. I didn't give up, Emma. I made a choice. To provide for you financially, even if it meant sacrificing your emotional connection to me. She shook her head, anger flashing through her tears. That's a terrible choice. We needed a mother, not a silent benefactor. The unfairness of her statement hit me like a physical blow. I tried to be your mother, every chance I got. But your father controlled the narrative. He decided when I could see you what you would think of me. He told you I was absent when I was actually working overtime to pay for your private school tuition. Emma flinched. He told us you chose work over family. I worked to support my family, I countered. While he spent money we didn't have on affairs and status symbols. She set the folder down, folding her hands tightly in her lap. I've idolized him my entire life, she whispered. He was the perfect father. Always there with exactly what I needed. Always. She trailed off, realization dawning on her face. Always taking credit for things he didn't provide. I finished softly. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of decades of deception settling around us. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice small. Thomas says he suspected something wasn't right for years. Thomas was older when the divorce happened, I reminded her. He saw more of the reality. He said. Emma hesitated. He said Dad convinced me to leave you off the wedding invitation list. That it was his idea, not mine. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. I don't remember it that way, she said defensively. Dad just mentioned that having both parents there might be awkward, and I agreed. And the suggestion just happened to come right after I questioned the wedding budget, I noted. Which your father had suddenly doubled without consulting me. Emma's head snapped up. Doubled? He told me you refused to contribute anything. That he was covering the entire cost himself. I shook my head sadly. The original budget we agreed on was $30,000. My half was $15,000. Then he called to say you wanted a different venue, more elaborate flowers, a designer dress. Suddenly it was $60,000. When I asked for details, he got defensive. He told me you called the wedding extravagant and unnecessary, she whispered. That you said I was being a bridezilla. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it hadn't been so deeply painful. I never said anything of the sort, Emma. I just wanted to know what the additional money was for. She buried her face in her hands. I was so angry at you. I told Nick you didn't care about our wedding. That you'd always been a cold, absent mother who prioritized money over family. Her words stung, but they weren't surprising. Robert had been feeding her that narrative for 25 years. Emma, I said gently, I've never been cold or absent by choice. I've been exactly as present as your father allowed me to be. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. It's 6 weeks before my wedding, and I don't know what's real anymore. Everything I believed about our family was a lie. Not everything, I said, finally moving to sit beside her on the sofa. Not the fact that I've always loved you, even when you couldn't see it. Emma didn't pull away when I tentatively placed my hand over hers. I don't know what to do now, she admitted. Dad's called me 4 times today. He wants to meet for dinner to clear things up. What do you want to do? I asked, careful not to push. She stared at the folder of bank statements. I want to understand what really happened. All those years ago and ever since. She met my gaze, something like determination settling on her features. I want the truth, Mom. The whole truth. For the first time in decades, I felt a flicker of hope. Then I'll tell you everything. For the next 3 hours, I walked Emma through the reality of my marriage to Robert. His affairs, his financial irresponsibility, his emotional manipulation. I showed her old photos I'd kept hidden away, emails I'd saved, the few journal entries that had escaped Robert's purge. I told her about the night Robert had threatened to turn my children against me if I didn't agree to his terms. About the years of paying for their milestones while receiving none of the gratitude. About watching from the sidelines as Robert played the role of perfect father using my money. When I finally finished, the clock on my mantel showed it was nearly midnight. Emma sat in stunned silence, occasionally nodding or wiping away tears. I don't know how to face him now, she finally said. How to look him in the eye knowing what he's done. You don't have to decide anything tonight, I reassured her. The wedding, she started, is still your day, I said firmly. Whatever you decide about the arrangements, about who walks you down the aisle, that's your choice. Emma gave me a searching look. Would you still come? After everything? The question caught me off guard. After years of exclusion, of being an afterthought in my children's lives, Emma was actually asking if I would attend her wedding. Of course I would, I said. I've never wanted anything but to share in your important moments. She nodded slowly, gathering the scattered papers back into the folder. Nick and I are having dinner with Thomas and Eliza tomorrow night. They're staying at a hotel downtown. She paused. Would you come? I think we all need to talk about what happens next. As I walked her to the door, Emma suddenly turned and wrapped her arms around me in a quick, awkward hug, the first she'd initiated in years. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. I'm so sorry, I never saw what was happening. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair. You weren't supposed to see it. That was the whole point. After she left, I sat alone in my quiet house, emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. Tomorrow I would meet my grandson for the first time. Tomorrow my children and I would begin the slow process of reconstructing our relationship based on truth rather than Robert's carefully managed fiction. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to think that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't always be invisible in my own family. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, my nerves making it impossible to sit still at home. The maitre d' led me to a private dining room Thomas had reserved, an unexpected luxury that made me wonder if my son was more financially successful than he'd let on, or if this was another expense Robert would expect me to cover without acknowledgement. As I waited, I smoothed my dress, a deep blue wrap style I'd bought specially for this occasion, and checked my makeup in my compact mirror. At 61, I was still presentable, though the years of stress had etched permanent lines around my eyes and mouth. Not for the first time, I wondered how different I might look if the past 25 years had been kinder. The door opened, and Thomas entered with a petite woman carrying a baby. My heart leapt at the sight of my grandson, bundled in a soft blue blanket. Mom, Thomas said warmly, embracing me with his free arm. This is Eliza. And this, he turned to the baby, is James. James, I repeated softly, reaching out to touch the infant's tiny hand. He reflexively grasped my finger, and a surge of love so powerful it was almost painful washed over me. Would you like to hold him? Eliza asked, already transferring the baby to my arms before I could answer. As I cradled my grandson, inhaling his sweet baby scent, the door opened again. Emma entered with a tall man I recognized from photos as her fiancé, Nick. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of me holding the baby, as if the image contradicted something fundamental in her understanding of me. Emma, I said, careful to keep my voice neutral. After our emotional conversation the previous night, I wasn't sure where we stood. She hesitated, then crossed the room to kiss my cheek. Mom, this is Nick. Her fiancé extended his hand, his expression curious but kind. Nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Harrington. And please, I corrected gently, shifting James in my arms to shake his hand. Nick glanced at Emma. I've heard a lot about you in the past 24 hours. I could imagine what kind of frantic explanations and revelations had been exchanged between them. Emma's face confirmed my suspicion, her cheeks flushing slightly as she looked away. Before anyone could say more, the door opened again. Robert stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "What is this?" he demanded, eyes darting around the room before settling on me. "A family ambush?" Thomas stepped forward, his posture rigid. "I invited you to dinner to discuss the wedding, Dad. I didn't say who else would be here." Robert's jaw tightened. "This is completely inappropriate. Emma and I need to finalize wedding details, not participate in whatever this is." "Actually," Emma said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I think it's long overdue for our entire family to have an honest conversation." Robert turned to her, his expression softening into the concerned father persona he'd perfected over the years. "Sweetheart, I know your mother has been filling your head with her version of the past, but bank statements don't lie, Dad," Emma interrupted. "Neither do the dates and amounts that perfectly match every major expense in my life." The color drained from Robert's face. He glanced at me holding his grandson, surrounded by both our children and their partners. For perhaps the first time since I'd known him, Robert seemed to realize he was outmaneuvered. "Let's all sit down," Thomas suggested, gesturing to the large round table set for 6. "James needs a nap anyway." He gently took the baby from my arms and settled him in a portable bassinet Eliza had set up in the corner. Robert remained standing while the rest of us took our seats. "I don't see the need for this dramatic production," he said stiffly. "If Emma has questions about financial arrangements, she could have asked me privately." "I did ask you," Emma replied. "You lied to me. Just like you've been lying to both of us for decades." "That's ridiculous," Robert scoffed, but his confidence was clearly shaken. "Everything I've done has been for this family. With Mom's money," Thomas said flatly. Robert finally sat down, straightening his tie, a nervous gesture I remembered from our marriage. "Your mother and I had an arrangement," he began. "An arrangement you forced on her by threatening to turn us against her," Emma cut in. Robert's gaze snapped to mine. "You had no right to tell them that." "She had every right," Thomas countered. "It's her truth, her life, her money that you've been taking credit for all these years." A waiter entered with water and wine, the atmosphere so tense that he quickly set down the bottles and retreated. No one reached for either. "I don't know what your mother hopes to accomplish with these accusations," Robert said, addressing our children while pointedly avoiding my gaze. "But if she's trying to disrupt Emma's wedding or damage your relationship with me, then—" "Stop," I interrupted, unable to listen to more deflection. "For once in your life, Robert, just stop." All eyes turned to me. I hadn't raised my voice, but there was a force behind my words that seemed to silence everyone. "I'm not trying to damage anything," I continued. "I've spent 25 years protecting Emma and Thomas from the truth about our marriage, about your manipulation, about the reality of who paid for what." I took a deep breath. "I kept your secrets, Robert. I let you take credit for my financial support. I watched from the sidelines while my children thanked you for opportunities that I provided. We had a deal," he hissed. "A deal built on coercion and threats," I replied evenly. "A deal that allowed you to play the hero while casting me as the villain. A deal that ends now." Emma reached for Nick's hand, her engagement ring catching the light. "The wedding is in 6 weeks," she said quietly. "I need to know who's actually paying for it." Robert started to speak, but Thomas cut him off. "The truth, Dad. For once." Robert's shoulders sagged slightly, the facade cracking. "Your mother agreed to pay half," he admitted reluctantly. 30,000. "And the other half?" Emma pressed. Robert shifted uncomfortably. "I was going to cover it." "With what?" Thomas asked skeptically. "Your practice barely survived the recession. You remortgaged your house last year. Where's 30,000 coming from?" Robert glared at him. "Have you been investigating me?" "I'm a financial analyst, Dad. It's not hard to connect the dots." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of deception. Finally Robert spoke, his voice low and defensive. "Patricia offered to help with the wedding. She and Stephen are doing well, and they want to contribute." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "So even now, you're not actually paying. Aunt Patricia is." "You've never been honest with them," I said quietly. "Not once in 25 years." Robert finally turned to face me, his expression a mix of anger and something else, perhaps shame, though I'd rarely seen that emotion from him. And you've just been a saint all these years, haven't you, Anne? Silently martyring yourself while paying the bills. I wasn't silent by choice, I reminded him. You threatened to destroy my relationship with my children if I told them the truth. Emma gasped softly, perhaps at hearing the threat stated so plainly, while Thomas's expression darkened. They deserved a stable home, Robert defended. A parent they could count on. And that parent was Mom, Thomas said firmly. It always was. As Robert opened his mouth to argue further, little James began to fuss in his bassinet. The sound seemed to cut through the tension, reminding us all of what really mattered. Eliza went to soothe the baby, and Nick cleared his throat. Maybe we should order dinner, he suggested. Continue this conversation with some food? No one objected, though the thought of eating seemed impossible. As the waiter took our orders, I noticed Emma watching me with a thoughtful expression. When our meals arrived, she finally spoke. I've made a decision about the wedding, she announced, setting down her fork. I want both my parents to walk me down the aisle. Together. Robert froze mid-bite, while a mix of surprise and cautious joy filled me. And Mom, Emma continued, meeting my eyes directly, I'd like you to help me choose a new dress. One that fits the actual budget we can afford. For the first time in decades, I saw my daughter looking at me. Really seeing me as her mother, not as the distant figure Robert had painted. I'd like that, I said simply, emotion making it difficult to say more. As we finished our meal, discussing more practical wedding details, I realized something profound had shifted. The walls of silence that had imprisoned me for 25 years were finally crumbling. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen. I was heard. I was Mom. Emma's wedding day arrived with the kind of perfect early autumn weather that photographers dream about: golden sunshine, a gentle breeze, and trees just beginning to hint at their coming transformation. Standing in the bridal suite of the garden venue, I watched as my daughter twirled in her dress, not the elaborate designer gown Robert had initially pushed for, but an elegant vintage-inspired creation we had found together during a weekend shopping trip that had somehow healed decades of distance. What do you think? Emma asked, her eyes seeking my approval in a way they hadn't since she was a little girl. You're breathtaking, I said truthfully. The dress highlighted her natural beauty without overwhelming it. Much like the scaled-back wedding we had planned together over the past 6 weeks. After the confrontation dinner with Robert, everything had changed. Emma had insisted on completely re-examining the wedding budget, horrified to discover that many of the essentials her father had claimed were necessary were actually just extravagances meant to impress his colleagues and friends. Together, we had created a celebration that was meaningful rather than showy, personal rather than performative. Robert, to my surprise, had retreated rather than fought. Perhaps he finally recognized that his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. Or perhaps he simply didn't have the energy for the battle. Either way, he had agreed to Emma's request that we both walk her down the aisle, though not without passive-aggressive comments about modern wedding trends. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Thomas poked his head in, grinning at the sight of his sister. Wow, Em. Nick is going to pass out when he sees you. Emma laughed, the sound light and genuine. Is everything ready? Almost, Thomas said. Dad just arrived. He's brought Patricia. I felt a flicker of tension. Patricia had been notably silent since our confrontation in the parking lot. I had hoped she might skip the wedding altogether. Emma sighed. Of course he did. She turned to me, concern in her eyes. Will you be okay? The question warmed me. After decades of being an afterthought, my daughter was prioritizing my feelings. I'll be fine, I assured her. Today is about you and Nick, not old family conflicts. Emma squeezed my hand gratefully. 15 minutes until showtime, she said. I need a moment alone if that's okay. Thomas and I stepped out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind us. How are you really doing, Mom? He asked quietly. I considered the question. 6 weeks ago, I had been excluded from my daughter's wedding plans entirely. Now I had helped shape every aspect of the day, from the flowers to the menu to the music. More importantly, I had reconnected with both my children in ways I had thought impossible. I'm better than I've been in decades, I admitted. Thomas smiled, but there was something cautious in his expression. Dad's been telling people he's covering most of the wedding costs, even after the budget changes. Of course he was. Some patterns never changed. Let him tell whatever stories make him feel important, I said. I know the truth. You and Emma know the truth. That's what matters. Thomas nodded, then hesitated. There's something else you should know. My body tensed instinctively, prepared for some new revelation of Robert's manipulation. Eliza and I have been talking, he continued. After seeing how Dad treated you, how he kept you from being part of our lives. He swallowed hard. We don't want James to grow up without knowing his grandmother. My heart swelled with emotion. What are you saying? We're moving back east, Thomas said. I've accepted a position in Boston. It's only a 2-hour drive from you. Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. Oh, Thomas. James needs you in his life, he said firmly. And frankly, so do we. I hugged my son tightly, unable to find words adequate for what this meant to me. For 25 years, I had accepted scraps of my children's lives, always from a distance, always on Robert's terms. Now Thomas was deliberately choosing to bring his family closer to me. The wedding coordinator appeared, gently reminding us that it was time to take our positions. As I moved to the back of the garden where Robert waited stiffly beside Emma, I felt a calm certainty that had eluded me for decades. Whatever Robert might say or do today couldn't touch me. I had my children back. I had the truth on my side. And, Robert acknowledged tensely as I approached. He looked older somehow, less commanding than he once had. The collapse of his carefully constructed narrative seemed to have physically diminished him. Robert, I replied evenly, turning my attention to our daughter, radiant in her wedding dress. Ready? Emma asked, linking her arms through both of ours. As the music began and we started our walk down the aisle, I noticed Patricia in the front row, her expression souring at the sight of me beside Robert. For a brief moment our eyes met, and I saw something I hadn't expected, not anger, but a kind of grudging respect. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Nick's vows to Emma brought tears to my eyes. His promise to always see her, hear her, and value her truth felt like a direct rebuke to the dynamics that had defined her parents' marriage. At the reception, I sat at the family table, surrounded by my children and their partners, with baby James dozing peacefully in a portable bassinet beside me. Robert sat across the table, making occasional stilted conversation but mostly focusing on his phone. Dad, can you put that away? Emma asked during the main course. It's my wedding day. Robert looked up, surprised at being called out. Sorry, just handling some work issues. On a Saturday? At your daughter's wedding. Thomas's tone made it clear he wasn't buying the excuse. Robert slipped the phone into his pocket, his expression slightly chastened. It was a small moment, but significant, my children setting boundaries with their father, perhaps for the first time. As the evening progressed, I found myself on the dance floor with Thomas, then Nick, then even with Emma for a special mother-daughter dance she had added to the program without telling me. When the DJ announced it, she simply appeared at my side, holding out her hand. I don't deserve this, I whispered as we swayed to the music. You deserve so much more, she replied, resting her head briefly on my shoulder. Later, as guests began to depart, Emma found me sitting at a quiet table, watching the last few couples on the dance floor. Thank you, she said, sitting beside me. Not just for today but for everything. For all the years you kept supporting us, even when we didn't see it, even when we didn't appreciate it. I took her hand, noting how the simple gold band now accompanying her engagement ring caught the light. You never have to thank me for being your mother, Emma. It's who I've always been, even when circumstances made it hard to see. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I wasted so many years believing Dad's version of our family. We can't get those years back, I said gently. But we have all the years ahead of us. As Emma rejoined Nick for their final dance, Robert approached my table, looking uncomfortable. You must be pleased with yourself, he said, his voice low. Turning them against me. I looked up at the man I had once loved, once feared, once allowed to define my worth as a mother. I didn't turn anyone against you, Robert. I just finally told the truth, he scoffed, and conveniently became the hero of the story. There are no heroes in this story, I replied. Just people who made choices. Some good, some terrible. I stood up, smoothing my dress. I'm done letting your choices define my relationship with my children. As I walked away, I felt 25 years of weight lifting from my shoulders. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer silenced. I was in Harrington, mother to Emma and Thomas, grandmother to James, a woman who had finally reclaimed her place in her family. 6 months later, I sat in my backyard, watching Thomas push James on the small swing set I'd installed for my grandson's visits. From the kitchen came the sounds of Emma and Eliza laughing as they prepared lunch. It was our monthly family gathering, a tradition we had started after the wedding. "Higher, Grandma. Look how high I'm going," James called out, his toddler grammar still developing but his enthusiasm boundless. "I see you, sweetheart," I called back, my heart full. Thomas caught my eye and smiled. "He couldn't stop talking about seeing you all week," he said, pushing the swing again. "Grandma this, Grandma that. Drove Eliza crazy." I laughed, savoring the sound of that precious title, Grandma. For so long I had feared I would never hear it, that Robert's campaign to marginalize me would extend even to the next generation. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Robert, responding to the invitation I'd extended for James's second birthday party next month. "Can't make it. Business trip. Send my regrets." I wasn't surprised. Since the wedding, Robert had become increasingly peripheral in our children's lives. Without the leverage of financial control, without the narrative of being the generous provider, he seemed unsure of his role. I had invited him to today's gathering as well, but he had declined with a similar excuse. I set the phone aside, refusing to let his absence diminish the joy of this moment. Emma emerged from the house carrying a tray of lemonade, her belly just beginning to show with my second grandchild. "Mom, Nick wants to know if we still have those photo albums from when Thomas and I were kids," she called. "He's trying to settle a debate about who had the worst 90s haircut." "In the hall closet, top shelf," I called back. Smiling at the easy way she said "Mom" now, like it was the most natural thing in the world. As I watched my family, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for decades. The path to this moment had been long and painful, but I wouldn't change it. Every silent year, every financial sacrifice, every moment of invisibility had led here. To this backyard, to these relationships rebuilt on truth, to this feeling of finally being seen. I was no longer invisible in my own family. I was at the very center of it, exactly where I belonged.